Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome from the CISS based on Mexico City. Our Secretary General is currently in Peru and is having issues with his connections. But with no further ado, we'll begin with this opening ceremony for this third high-level dialogues for a global vision on social security. Here with me, we have the Underdirector of Strategic Alliances, Brandon Perez Gonzalez, who reached out to everyone who's meeting us today and which we are really thankful for in the organization of this activity. First of all, I would like to have Clarence Endara, who's part of the LAES, Latin American Economic System, who will greet us. Thank you very much and welcome.
Muchas gracias. Muy buen día. En
Thank
nombre
you
del Sistema
and good
Económico
day.
Latinoamericano
In
y del Caribe,
behalf of the
agradezco la
LAES, I
información del
would like
trabajo
to
conjunto que realizamos
acknowledge
con nuestro
and
gran
thank
socio, que es
the
la
joint work that
Conferencia
we
Interamericana de
do
Seguridad
along with
Social.
the
Acaba de
CISS.
llegar el maestro
Please
Álvaro Velarca,
let
nuestro mayor
Mr.
saludo, y
Alvaro
a todo el equipo
Velarca
que ha ido coordinando para que esto se
receive
pueda
our
llevar
greetings
adelante.
and thank
Este
you for
conversatorio
all
titulado Hacia la inclusión
the efforts made.
socioeconómica de las personas
This
migrantes y su inserción en la seguridad
high
social,
level dialogue
inserto en la
for
tercera
social
edición de este
insertion
diálogo de
is
alto
part of the
nivel,
third
nos permitirá
high
compartir una visión más
level
completa del
dialogues
ámbito de la
and
seguridad
allow us
social,
to have
permitiendo
a
así analizar
broader
los retos
vision
comunes y
and
más
to see
críticos que
the
enfrentamos
common
regionalmente en el
issues that we
contexto
have
global
on the
de
region
constante
and on the global
transformación. Estoy
level,
convencido que
which
a
is
través de
something
esta
that constantly
sinergia podremos
transforms.
abordar
I
de
am
manera más
convinced that
integral y
we
efectiva
will be
los
able to
aspectos
approach on a more
específicos en el tema de
comprehensive
los
way
movimientos humanos
the topics
migratorios. Mi
regarding
intención es
migration.
seguir creando
Our
espacios para
intention is to
intercambiar ideas,
create these spaces
propuestas, además
to
de apostar al
interchange ideas
reconocimiento y
and proposals
desarrollo e
and to
implementación de políticas
foster
públicas
the
adecuadas y
public
efectivas
implementation of
que
policies
coadyuven al
that
bienestar de las
help
poblaciones.
to
Estimadas y
improve the
estimados
livelihood
panelistas y
of
potenciales
those who live in
participantes,
our countries.
conocí hace
Members
unas
of the panels
vulnerabilidades
and
con las cuales
participants,
están
we all
sometidas
know
también
which
las personas
are
migrantes,
the situations
especialmente
of the
mujeres,
migrants, especially
adolescentes,
women,
niñas y niños,
teenagers, and
su
the
expuesto a
children,
riesgos como la
groups that
explotación y el
are
abuso por grupos de
subject
personas en
to
organizaciones
exploitation and abuse
indiscriminadas.
by
En este sentido,
organizations that
consideramos que es
are
importante concientizar y
non-scrupulous. We
profundizar el
think
debate y
that
la
it is
búsqueda de
important
soluciones en el
to
marco de la movilidad
look for
migratoria.
solutions in
Temas
this
relevantes,
migration
dentro de los
situation.
cuales quiero destacar
Those
el
are
estatus
relevant
migratorio, la ausencia de
topics, and
recursos
I would like
y
to
la
highlight the
pertenencia de
lack of
personas
resources,
desconocidas.
the
A
migratory
partir de dichos
status, and
puntos,
the
se abre un abanico de
lack of
posibilidades
information
para el
of those who are
desarrollo de
missing.
estrategias que
Then we
contribuyan a
have
promover
a
la
broad
inclusión socioeconómica de los
opportunity to
migrantes.
include
Si
migrants
bien son muchas las
in our
estrategias de
economic
gobiernos
landscape.
nacionales y en la
Although there are
región
several
aproximados
strategies that
para
we
forzar
have
el logro de la integración exitosa de los
try
migrantes
to
en los
deploy
países de
to
acogida, así
successfully
como mejorar la
integrate migrants
situación en los
in
territorios
our
de
countries
tránsito, resulta pues necesario
as
revisar los
both
avances en
transit
la
and
regulación de los
destination,
estatus
we need to
migratorios, ya que a través de esta
advance in the
ley son
regulation of
relevantes
the migration
flexibilidades a
status
los
and to
migrantes
help
para el
migrants
ejercicio de derechos
to
esenciales en
exercise
acceso al
their rights
trabajo, a la
such as
seguridad
right to
social y a
work,
la vivienda,
right to social
para mencionar
security and
algunos de
livelihood,
ellos.
just to mention a
Actualmente,
couple of them.
resulta pertinente
Currently,
coordinar
it
esfuerzos de
is
manera
worth
mancomunada para
doubling
disminuir las
our efforts
desigualdades de género en el
jointly
marco de la
so that we
migración y
can
trabajar en
reduce
fortalecimiento y
gender
respeto de los derechos
discrimination
humanos, a
and
fin de
work
incidir
in
en la
favor
reducción de los
of
impactos
human rights
socioeconómicos
to
negativos en la
decrease
sociedad y
negative
con
effects
especial
on
énfasis en los
society,
grupos más
especially
vulnerables.
on those who are most
Avanzar hacia una
vulnerable.
gobernanza regional
We can also
facilitará la
go to
adopción de
our
enfoques
towards
inclusivos y
a
equitativos
governance
para
that is
reconocer
regional,
la
and
diversidad de
then we can
situaciones y
acknowledge
necesidades de las personas
different
migrantes.
situations
Esta
of the migrants.
gobernanza debe estar
This
promovida a través
governance
de la
must be
participación de
promoted
los diferentes
through
actores
the
involucrados,
participation of
los
all
gobiernos,
parties
la
involved,
sociedad civil y
governments,
las
civil
organizaciones
society, and
internacionales. Es por
organizations.
ello que el CELA, como un organismo
That's why
intergubernamental que
LAES,
promueve un
as an
sistema de consulta y
intergovernmental
coordinación para
body
acordar posiciones y
that
estrategias regionales,
coordinates
impulsa la
regional
cooperación e
strategies,
integración de
boosts
América
the
Latina y el
coordination and
Caribe.
integration of
Uno de
Latin
los
America
temas
and the Caribbean.
prioritarios que tiene
And
nuestro
one of
programa de
the
trabajo
top
es
priorities of our work
precisamente el
agenda
tratamiento de la movilidad
includes
humana.
the treatment
Nuestros
of human
objetivos
mobility.
se
Our
centran en
objectives
promover que
are
los
based
programas
on
exitosos que se han
promoting
implementado en los
successful
Estados
programs that
miembros
have been
mediante la
deployed on member
intervención de los
states
gobiernos, agencias
by governments,
internacionales, la sociedad
international
civil y
agencies,
actores
civil
privados para la promoción de la
society,
integración
and
de los
third
migrantes,
parties
así como
to include
promover
migrants and
iniciativas
to
que
promote
fortalezcan el
initiatives
diseño de
that
políticas de
strengthen
integración
the design of migration policies based on human rights and that are oriented to addressing the vulnerable
El
groups'
dialogar sobre acciones
needs.
de cooperación y espacios de
Dialoguing
incidencia política en
on
los diferentes
these
sectores, tanto a
topics
nivel
and
nacional como
the
a nivel
impact
regional,
that we
siempre
have
será
both
nuestra prioridad.
domestically and abroad
Dado
will
que la
be
inclusión
always our
social de las
priority.
personas en situación
As
de
social
movilidad global
inclusion
se dirige a un proceso
in
de mejoramiento de las
these
condiciones
scenarios
económicas,
aims to
sociales y
improving
culturales,
the livelihoods
políticas
and the
también
culture
que
and
facilitan la
politics of
participación de
our
la persona
peoples
en la sociedad,
and the
nos lleva a
participation of
nuevos desafíos que
society,
conlleva procurar la
we
inclusión
need to
laboral
think
de
about the
personas
challenges
migrantes
that
en la
are in
región.
front of
El camino
migrants
de la
and of us.
regularización de los
The
migrantes es
road to
fundamental. Tendrá que ser
regularizing
complementado por
migrants is
políticas y
key,
programas
but it
también de
must go
integración
along with
socioeconómica. De igual
integration
forma,
policies.
debemos abordar de manera central los
Also,
déficits,
we
las
need to
desigualdades
approach
de género,
the
la instalación de
inequalities
trabajos
of gender
remunerados
and
y
the
el bajo nivel de acceso a las
remunerated
políticas
work and the
integrales
access
de
to
cuidados, entre otros aspectos.
policies that take care
Finalmente,
of
a
the
modo de
citizens.
recomendación, diremos
Finally,
que
as a
debemos avanzar en
recommendation,
la
I would like
conceptualización de
to
la migración
invite you
también
to
como una
conceptualize
oportunidad que
migration
pudiese
as an
contribuir tanto a los
opportunity
países
that
de
can
origen como
help
de destino.
both
Al
origin and
considerar que las
destination
personas
countries,
migrantes
considering
contribuyen a
those
reducir
who
los
are
déficits
migrating,
estructurales de fuerza de trabajo y estimulan el crecimiento
strengthen
económico.
the work
El reforzar
labor,
la inclusión socioeconómica de las personas
including
migrantes
them
y su
as
inserción en
migrants
la seguridad
and
social
inserting them in social
apuntarán a sumar
security,
efectivamente al
will
desarrollo de nuestra región.
effectively
Muchas
develop
gracias
our
por
region.
permitirme
Thank
dar
you very
las
much
palabras de
for
apertura
allowing
y
me
les deseo
to
el mayor de los éxitos en
give
este
these opening
programa.
remarks, and I wish you
Esperemos
the
que este
best of
diálogo y
success.
discusiones
And
puedan
I hope
aportar
that these
a tener un
dialogues will
enfoque
help us
regional sobre esta
have
problemática.
a regional focus on these problems. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, embajador Clarence.
Thank
En
you very
nada,
much,
secretario
Ambassador
permanente del Círculo
Clarence,
Económico Latinoamericano y del Caribe, mencionarle
Secretary
a la
of
audiencia,
LAES, and I would
Caja
like
y
to
al público en
mention the
general
members
que
and
para
our
nosotros
public
la
that
colaboración con CELA es
for us
clave y
the
siempre buscamos
collaboration with
compartir
LAES
estos
is key,
espacios
and we
para que
also
se enriquezca
strive
esta
to
región de
have
los
them
diálogos.
and to
A
strengthen and
continuación, me
enrich these
gustaría darle
dialogues.
la
Now,
palabra al doctor
I would like
Mario David
to give
Cerón
the floor
Flores, que
to
es
Mario David
vicepresidente de la
Cerón
Junta
Flores,
Directiva del Instituto Guatemalteco de Seguridad
who
Social
is the
y que
president of
representa
the
a este
Social
instituto en la
Security
coordinación
Institute
de la
of Guatemala
subregión 2
and who is
Centroamérica.
part of the
Un gusto
Region 2
saludarle,
Central
doctor.
America
Adelante, por
of
favor.
this conference.
Muchas gracias,
Nice
muy
to have
buenos
you.
días a
Thank you.
todas las personas que
And
nos
good day to
acompañan.
everyone who's
Saludo especial
joining us.
y con un gran afecto al secretario general de la
Also,
Conferencia
I'd like to
Interamericana de
greet
Seguridad Social,
the
el
chair
maestro
of
Álvaro
the
Velarde
CISS,
Hernández,
Mr.
quien
Alvaro
esperamos
Velarca
que todo
Hernandez.
le esté marchando
We
bien por
hope
su
everything
ausencia.
is
Y
going
también
okay
extiendo mi
on
saludo al
its South
secretario
American
permanente del Sistema
tour.
Económico
Also,
Latinoamericano
I
y
would
del
like
Caribe,
to
el
greet
embajador
the
Clarence
ambassador
Sendara.
of LAS,
Gracias por
Ambassador
acompañarnos en este
Clarence
conversatorio y por su
Sendara.
compromiso en
Thank you
coordinar
for
este
being with
evento.
us and thank you for your
Es un
commitment
honor
to
darle la
coordinating this
bienvenida a
event.
los terceros diálogos
It
de
is
alto
an honor
nivel
to have you on
hacia
this
la
third
inclusión
high-level dialogue
socioeconómica de las
towards the
personas
social
migrantes y
inclusion
su inserción
of those
en la seguridad
migrating
social.
and its inclusion
Este
on
evento es una iniciativa de la
the social security.
región
This is
2
a
Centroamérica
Region 2
con el firme
initiative
compromiso de
with a
abordar
firm
uno de los
commitment
temas
to
más
approach one of
trascendentes
the
de
most
nuestra región,
transcendent
los que
problems of
son los
our region,
migrantes y el
migrants,
impacto socioeconómico
and
en
their
busca de tener
impact, both
seguridad
economical and
social.
social, in social security
La
matters.
migración es un
Migration
fenómeno que ha
is a
transformado
phenomenon
nuestras
that
sociedades,
has transformed
teniendo
our
impacto
societies,
tanto
and
en
it
los
has had
países de
an
la
impact
región
both in the
como
region
a los de destino.
and the destination
Las
countries.
y los migrantes contribuyen al
Those who
desarrollo
migrate
económico y cultural
contribute
de las
to the
naciones,
cultural and
pero también
social
enfrentan
development of
desafíos
nations,
importantes,
and they also
entre
face
ellos
important
la
challenges.
exclusión de los
Among
sistemas de
them,
seguridad social representa una de las barreras
the exclusion
más
of Social
críticas para
Security
su plena inclusión
is one of the
social.
largest barriers to their
Como
full
Instituto
social
Guatemalteco de Seguridad
economic
Social
development.
y como
In Guatemala
coordinación
and
subregional
in
2
the coordination of
Centroamérica,
the
considero que
Region
tenemos la
2 in Central
responsabilidad de
America,
garantizar
I
que los
believe we
sistemas de
are
seguridad
responsible of
social
guaranteeing that
incluyan
social
a todas
security
las
systems
personas
include
sin
everyone
discriminación,
without
así como
discrimination.
fomentar
We
los
also
espacios donde se pueda
strive
dialogar
to
para una
create
mejor
spaces to dialogue to
concientización
raise
de esta
awareness
realidad.
of this
Es
reality.
fundamental visibilizar
It is of the
la
utmost importance to gain
interseccionalidad en
visibility
la
of the
migración,
intersectionality
entendiendo que
of
las
migration
personas migrantes
and
no
to
son un grupo
understand that
homogéneo,
migrants
pues
are
hay que
not a
considerar que
homogeneous
existen
group.
factores
we need to consider that there are factors such as gender, age, the condition of vulnerability, migration
los cuales
status,
deben ser contemplados
which
al
must
diseñar
be
políticas de seguridad social
foreseen
que respondan a
when we
las
design social
necesidades
security
específicas
policies that
de
answer
cada
to the
individuo.
specific needs of each
Asimismo,
individual.
es crucial analizar el impacto
Likewise, it is
socioeconómico
important to
de los
analyze the
migrantes en las
social
economías de nuestra
and
región.
economic impact
Estas
of
personas
migrants
no
in
solo
our region.
contribuyen a la fuerza
They
laboral
do
y
not
al
only
crecimiento
contribute
económico,
to the
sino
workforce
que
and
también
to the
aportan al
economic development,
fortalecimiento de los
they
sistemas de
also
seguridad social
help
a
strengthen
través de
social
sus
security systems
contribuciones.
through their contributions.
Desde nuestra perspectiva
From
institucional,
our institutional
debemos
perspective,
entender que las
we
personas
must
migrantes
understand that
no
migrants
son una carga,
are
sino
not
una
a burden,
oportunidad para
but
dinamizar
an
nuestras
opportunity
economías.
to gain more
Las
dynamics in our
instituciones de seguridad
economies.
social
Social security
exigen su
institutions
inclusión no solo
strive
como
to
un
include
deber
them
ético,
not only
sino
as an
como una
ethical
estrategia
matter,
clave
but
para la
as a
sostenibilidad
strategy
financiera
for
y el
financial
bienestar
sustainability
social de
and
nuestras naciones.
social well-being of our nations.
Nuestro objetivo es ofrecer un acceso
Our
integrado a las
goal is to have a
prestaciones en la
comprehensive access
salud,
to
la
health,
educación, la protección laboral,
attention, labor
aspectos
protection,
esenciales para mejorar la calidad de
essential
vida de los
factors
migrantes.
to improve the
Sabemos que la
livelihoods of
seguridad social
migrants.
no es
We
un
know that
privilegio,
social security
sino
is
un
not a
derecho
privilege,
universal
but a
y debemos
universal
analizar
right,
las políticas
and we
públicas
must analyze
existentes
the
para
existing
identificar
public policies
oportunidades que
to
permitan
identify
una
opportunities
inclusión
that allow
efectiva y
for an
equitativa.
effective and
Estoy
equitable
convencido de que con la
access.
colaboración
I
entre
am
los sectores
convinced that
públicos
with the
y
collaboration of
organismos
public and
internacionales y
private
actores sociales, avanzaremos
actors
hacia una
and
región donde
NGOs
los
and
migrantes
governments,
sean
we
parte
will go
integrada
towards
del
a
desarrollo
region where
socioeconómico.
migrants are
Les
a key part
invito a
of social
participar
and economic
activamente
development
en
in
el
our countries.
conversatorio de hoy.
I
Tengo
invite
la
you to
certeza
have
de
an
que
active
nuestros
participation today
panelistas
and in these
invitados darán un gran desempeño
high-level
y se
dialogues.
profundizarán en el
There is no
análisis de
doubt in
los
my mind
desafíos
that
que
we will go
enfrentamos,
in depth in
siempre con
our
la mirada
common
puesta
challenges,
en la
always
dignidad
looking
y el bienestar de
for
todas
the
las
well-being
personas.
of
Muchas
everyone.
gracias.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Mario David
Thank you very
Cerondoni,
much,
por el
Dr.
trabajo
Mario
que han
Ceron.
hecho a través de la coordinación
Thank you also for
Asociación
your work
Centroamericana.
on the
También,
sub-region
pues es un
of
placer
Central America.
mencionarles que el
It
doctor
is
Cerón
also a
nos apoyó
pleasure
con un
for me
artículo
to
respecto
tell
del
you
tema
that
que será tratado
Dr.
en el
Ceron
conversatorio,
helped us with
el
a
cual será
topic that
publicado
will be
una vez
published
que termine este primer panel
once the
en la
first
página
panel
web de la conferencia.
is finished.
El
It will be
título del
published on the
artículo es
webpage of
Migración
the
desde,
CISS.
Migración
The
desde
title is
Centroamérica hacia
Migration from
otros
Central
países.
America
Muchísimas
towards
gracias
other
por su
countries. Thank you
colaboración.
very much
Doctor
for your
Cerón,
collaboration, Dr.
nuestro
Ceron.
secretario general no ha podido resolver
Our
aún
Secretary
sus
General
problemas de
has
conexión, pero en
not
cualquier momento nos
yet
comentará
resolved
algo de ello quizá
his
le demos la palabra
connection
al finalizar
problems.
el mismo.
Probably he will have the
Recordamos
floor at
que
the end.
siendo las
But with no
10:22
further ado,
horas en la Ciudad
this
de
being
México, sede de la
10:22
Conferencia
in
Interamericana de
Mexico
Seguridad
City,
Social,
on the headquarters of
en
the
nombre del
CISS,
secretario general Álvaro
on
Verdeja
behalf
Hernández,
of
declarar
Dr. Alvaro
estos terceros
Meraca
diálogos de alto
Hernandez, I
nivel
would like
hacia
to
una visión
open
global de
these
la seguridad
high-level
social como
dialogues
inaugurados.
for,
Muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que nos
and
ven
this
a través de
is
nuestras redes
an
sociales
open
y que
event
están
now. Thank you
conectadas en
for
el
being
Zoom.
here in our social
Para
media
dar
and
inicio
for
formal
joining
a este
us
panel,
through
le
Zoom.
voy a ceder la
So
palabra
now I will give the
a nuestro
floor
director de
to
las
our
alianzas
Underdirector
estratégicas, Brandon
of
Pérez González, quien hará una
Strategic
pequeña
Alliances,
introducción. No
who
sin
will
antes
have a little
recordarles que
introduction.
contamos con traducción
I would also like to remind you that we
los 3
have
idiomas
translation to
oficiales
all
de la
three
conferencia.
languages of the
Y
conference.
bueno, pues les dejo un saludo. La consejera técnica y
I
jurídica, María
greet you as
Teresa
well,
González, a la orden
Maria
para
Teresa
responder.
González. I'm
Muchísimas
yours
gracias,
truly,
consejera.
and
Muchas gracias a
with
todas
no
las
further ado,
personas
thank you
panelistas
very
que forman
much.
parte de este conversatorio. Hemos
Thank
tenido
you
una gran
for the
respuesta por
members.
parte de
We've
instituciones
had a
que
great
forman parte de
response
esta subregión
of
centroamericana y de
the
los
Central
aliados de la
America
conferencia.
and other regions
Quiero comentarles que pues tenemos
participation.
una gran
We
variedad de
have
personas
a
panelistas con
large
quienes
variety of
esperamos generar
panel
un episodio
members,
muy nutrido. Y
which
para
will
ello los
provide
aprovecho a invitar a la
to
maestra Mera
deepen
Picasso, que es
the
la moderadora de este
this
panel, así
dialogue.
que yo me voy a permitir
We will have
simplemente
also the
presentarla y
moderator,
después
and
ella
I will
tendrá el
only
uso de la voz
introduce
durante todo el resto del conversatorio.
for
Mera
this
es licenciada en
conversatory.
Administración por la Benemérita Universidad
Our
Autónoma de Puebla,
moderator
maestra en
is
Patrimonio
a
Cultural y
master,
Desarrollo
has a
por la
master's
Universidad
on
de
development
Lleida, en España,
on the
así
Leida,
como
by the Leida
un máster
University in
en
Spain,
Titulación
and a
Bilingüe en
master's
Relación Intercultural con
on
especialización
cultural
en Migración
mediation
por la
with
Universidad Javeriana
specialization
en
on
Bélgica
migration
y la Universidad
on
en
the Lille
Su carrera profesional
University
se ha
of
desarrollado
France.
en proyectos sobre integración
She has developed
socioeconómica de la persona
her
migrante
work
y
on the
refugiada
migrants
y
and the
trabaja
refugees,
actualmente en organismos de sociedad
and she
civil
is
en Francia,
currently working
Bélgica y
on
Canadá y
France,
México.
Belgium,
Se
and Mexico
desempeña como
City.
oficial general de
She
proyecto
works as
recubrimiento
an
de
official
justicia entre
of
México y
ethical
Canadá, donde coordina el
recruitment
desarrollo de un
between Mexico
corredor
and Canada,
laboral
where
de frontera
she
mexicana a
coordinates a
colombiano-británica,
corridor
donde a través
for
del
the help
fortalecimiento
of
de
Mexican
capacidades
workers on the
institucionales de
British
los sectores
Columbia
público y privado, se
area of
garanticen los
Canada
derechos humanos
to
y el trabajo
guarantee
en las
human
personas
rights
migrantes
and labor rights
transfronterizas.
for migrants
Muchísimas gracias
across
por haber
borders.
aceptado la
Thank you
invitación,
very much for
maestra, y
this
tener esta
invitation, Master,
audición.
and you will have the floor right now.
Muchísimas gracias
Thank you very much.
también por la invitación. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a,
Thank you very
a
much
todos
for
y
the
cada una de las
invite,
personas que
for the
están
invitation,
acompañándonos
and
el
I
día
would
de
like
hoy.
to
Es
greet
un honor
everyone
para mí
who's
también
joining us.
estar
It is an honor for
en
me
esta moderación
to be
sin
acting as a
más voy a
moderator. With no
presentar
further ado, I will
a
introduce you
justamente Juan Ignacio Castillo, quien
to
es
Juan
coordinador
Ignacio
de programas
Castillo, who's a
regionales sobre migración
coordinator
laboral y
of the regional
Centroamérica de la
program for Central
Organización
America
Internacional del
of
Trabajo, quien
the
nos
ILO,
dará
International
una
Labor
presentación
Organization,
sobre la extensión de
who
la seguridad
will
social a la
present us
población
social
migrante,
insertion
desafíos y
on migrants,
oportunidades.
which
Y
are the
antes de
challenges and the
pasarle el uso de la
opportunities.
voz, me
And prior
gustaría
to
hablarles un
giving
poquito
him the floor,
sobre la
I would like to
trayectoria
speak a little
de
bit
Juan
about
Ignacio, quien es
his trajectory,
licenciado en filosofía y
who
máster en ciencias
studied
políticas de la
philosophy
Universidad
and
Católica de
masters
Chile.
in the
También
Chile
es experto en
Catholic
migración laboral y
University.
actualmente coordina un
He's also
programa
an
regional
expert
sobre migración
on
laboral en
labor, and he's
Centroamérica, México
working
y el Caribe,
on Central
enfocado en
America,
protección
Mexico, and
social
the
de
Caribbean,
mujeres migrantes.
focused
Antes de
on
integrarse en
migrant
la
women
Organización
and social
Internacional del
protection.
Trabajo,
Prior to
en el
his
año
participation
2009 ha
in
trabajado como
ILO, he
oficial de
worked
proyectos
as
sobre
an officer
democracia
of
y derechos
projects on
laborales
democracy
de la
and
OEA.
labor rights
En la
of
OIT ha
the
trabajado en diferentes proyectos
Inter-American
de
Organization
cooperación
and the
técnica en áreas como
ILO.
la
He has
promoción
worked
del
in
diálogo
different
social, la
technical works
protección de las
in social
normas
dialogue,
internacionales de
the
trabajo y también la migración laboral.
normalization of
Sin
work,
más,
and
les cedemos la palabra y muchas
with no
gracias.
further ado, we will have the floor for you. Thank you very
Muchas
much.
gracias, Merari.
Thank
Muchas
you very much,
gracias a
Merari,
todas y todos.
and
Muy
thank
buenos
you to
días.
everyone.
Particular
Good
saludo y
morning,
agradecimiento
especially.
también al señor
Thank you
embajador, la
to
área fundada,
Mr.
y
Ambassador,
también a las palabras de bienvenida del
and
doctor
thank you for
Mario
your
David
kind
Cerón.
words,
Muchas
Dr.
gracias por
Mario
la
David Ceron.
introducción.
Thank you very much
Efectivamente,
for the introduction.
nuestro interés es
So our
aprovechar
interest right
para
now is
una
to
breve presentación.
have a brief presentation.
No sé si podría yo,
I don't know if I
tengo
am
la
able
posibilidad de
to
preguntar
share my
o no.
screen or not.
Creo que no me aparece. Creo que sí,
I
ya.
don't know if I have. Oh, I
Y
have the opportunity now.
ya lo tenemos aquí.
Okay,
Entonces,
we have it here.
permítame, díganme si lo pueden ver, si se está viendo.
Can you see this?
Sí, ya lo podemos ver.
Yes.
Ya lo pueden ver perfectamente. Muy bien. Entonces, el interés de nosotros es aprovechar
So
para
our
dar
interest
algún tipo
is
de
to
ideas,
provide
un
some
poco de información
ideas
introductoria que
and some
permita
introduction
más bien
information
a generar y a
that
promover
can
espacios
lead to
de
promoting
diálogo y
dialogue
a
spaces.
generar algunos lineamientos para que el
Also,
diálogo
it
sea
can
más
help us
fructífero en
make
estas jornadas,
some guidelines
en
to
estos
have
diálogos de alto nivel.
fruitful
Me
dialogues in
gustaría
these high-level
partir
dialogues.
reconociendo algunos elementos
I would
que se
like
han
to
comentado ahora en
start by
estas
talking about some elements that
primeras
we've
palabras, pero que nos parece siempre
seen
bueno
in these
recordar.
introductory words, but I
Efectivamente,
believe it is
vivimos
worth
en una
mentioning.
región
We
donde
live
cada vez
in a
más
region
se da
where
este contexto de desafíos de
we
flujos
have
migratorios que cada
increasing
vez son más
challenges for
crecientes y que cada
migration
vez tienen
that
características más
have
específicas.
more
Hemos
specific
considerado
characteristics.
el
We
estudio
have
de movilidad humana y
considered
migración
studying
laboral
human
elaborado por la
mobility,
OIT en América Latina para el
and that is
2024, nos va
done by
dando
ILO in 2024.
lineamientos y nos va
And it provides us
mostrando
with
cómo va
guidelines, and it shows us
aumentando la cantidad de
how
personas que cada vez más participan de
there are
estos
more
flujos
and more
migratorios.
people
Se
participating in
calcula que
these
si en el 2010
migration
habían 8
flows.
millones
In
aproximadamente, para
2010, we had around 8
2020 está en
million
torno a 15,
migrants, but
cerca de 15
by
millones.
2020,
Y
it
un
is
proceso es que
around
cada vez
15
van
million.
creciendo. Lo que también nos
And
da
this is a
muestras
growing
es el
pattern.
marco de los diferentes
Also, we can
flujos
see the
migratorios,
framework
es
of the
decir,
different
cada
migration
vez más
flows.
hablamos de estos nuevos flujos en
Increasingly,
los
we
cuales
see these
los
new
países
flows
interactúan
where
desde diferentes
countries
ámbitos.
interact from different
Tradicionalmente
spheres.
teníamos los países donde el sitio
Traditionally,
donde
we
los
have
países, desde
countries
donde las personas migraban hacia un determinado
that
lugar,
were the
pero ahora
source
los
of the
países
migration
conviven con
towards a
diferentes flujos.
definite place,
Una
but now
misma
we have
región puede
different
tener población que migra,
flows. We have
población
populations that
estancándose
are
o cualquier
migrating
población
in transit and population arriving to the country as a destination country. So we have all three flows in the same countries. And we know that every single one of these migration patterns are due to economic and social factors and to the context that deem migrating necessary. For instance, the weather or the climate. And I believe this is very important to remind ourselves as ILO. Regardless of the type of migration that we have, that is population in transit, population that is being moved, regardless of the cause, political, economic, or environmental, work is one of the important factors, and it is key because every single one of these aspects require for the population to have an access to a work and to do what ILO understand as a decent job that meets the international work guidelines, that create spaces for dialogue and representation of the people, and last but not least, which is the reason we are here, that they can have proper access to Social Security. We would like to highlight today that in order for us to go in depth and to acknowledge the importance of Social Security and migration, and in order to integrate and to generate policies that acknowledge in an effective way their insertion, we need two elements that we have recently been created, and I believe it is really important to remind. First of all, in order to have an effective coverage, we need to know the characteristics and the particular conditions of the migrating population. That is to say, what Dr. Ceron is, this is the diversity of the migrant population. Who are they? What are their characteristics? And secondly, we need to understand in depth the structural conditions of the social protection systems both in the destination and origin countries. We need to understand that Social Security involves not only a series of institutions, it involves that series of institutions, a series of policies also that condition the effective acknowledgement and participation of people, and a series of actions that are key in order to achieve successfully their participation and integration as migrants. If we understand and we categorize and account for this diversity on these particularities of the migrant population and its complexities of those actions and actors who constitute Social Security, we can establish guidelines, policies that are surrounding Social Security and social protection for those who migrate. A good and effective integration is what determines that a public policy is successful across the region. We will go in depth into every one of these aspects. First of all, what is a migrant and why do we have this diversity that is a conditioning factor for its participation and that condition their access to Social Security? We have several types of migrant population, as we mentioned previously, that generate elements to consider every single one of their participation as migrants, people who migrate due to political situations and who are looking for asylum, who look for asylum requests and that become refugees. We also have migrants due to environmental conditions. We also have temporary migration. Every single one of these have their own specific characteristics. Also, in the case of males, and we are increasingly speaking about migrating women, which we have seen as an invisible phenomenon. We also see the type of nationality, the background they have, the scholar background they have, the type of economic sector in which they are participating. All each of every single one of these elements allow us to create an approach to work with migrants. Generally speaking, with no more detail of this information, this is a work that not necessarily responds in an efficient manner, because one person that's working on the rural sector or an informal sector, maybe it is a woman who is working on the informal job market. It can also be the case of an asylum seeker. Each one of every single element are key to consider in order to gain access to Social Security. The same case is with the systems of Social Security and institutions. This involve acknowledge this integration character of different institutions, policies, and different actors as well. Something also that we deem very important is this need of acknowledging how these social security systems are integrated, which are the barriers, which is the degree of strengths or weaknesses that the institutions themselves can have in order to acknowledge how and specifically when do we work with the institutions and with the social security system. For the ILO, this is one of the most important topics because in order to have these dialogue processes, we need to know that the challenge of social security and their systems in our region is a challenge not only for the migrating population, but also for the local population, the people who are born in the country, so to speak. So, social security systems have a challenge to incorporate migrants and some other countries where we have the largest gaps to access, where we have low compliance or low access for people to get part of the social security systems. They also face another challenge both for nationals and for migrants. This is an element that is worth mentioning, acknowledging the capacity of the social security systems and which is the status in which they are currently standing. This helps us to understand which type of population can access the policies, actions, and systems as well as integration for the social security policies across different countries. We have all sorts of challenges, for instance, governance, as Mr. Ambassador just mentioned, the possibility of integrating public policy jointly. That is one of the most important topics. Also, equal treatment and access to people. The compliance conditions that the different institutions may have, both for social protection and the institutions of the work ministries, or different instances to look after the compliance of the guidelines. The representation of and the participation of the actors within the organizations and the gaps that we may have individually to access both legally and in the opportunities, and as we say, the legal framework that they may have access to in different places. that are part of
Lo
the
que queremos
system.
decir, y en esto nos
What
parece
we
muy
want to say,
importante,
and it
no
seems very
es que
important to
las
us,
personas
it's
nacionales y
not
las
that the
personas migrantes
nationals and
tienen los
migrant
mismos,
people would have
en todo momento
at all
las mismas
times
brechas.
the same
Sin
gaps.
duda alguna, las personas migrantes
Undoubtedly, migrants
enfrentan
have to face
una mayor exclusión. Y permítanme
higher
citar
exclusion.
5
And
de
I
estas
want to quote
exclusiones o de estas
5 of these exclusions
barreras que son mucho
or
más altas
barriers
en las personas
that are
migrantes que en las
higher
personas nacionales, tal como la
for
carencia de
migrants than
información
for
de sus
nationals.
derechos, la
Lack of
restricción
information on their
jurídica, ¿verdad?
rights,
Los marcos legales
the
pueden ser más
legal
restrictivos y
frameworks
son
could be
en
much
algunas
more
ocasiones más
restrictive
restrictivos para las personas
for
migrantes,
migrants,
o por ejemplo los
or
procesos
for instance, the
complejos, los procedimientos que
processes
son
which are
complejos y
much more
obstaculizan el
complex
proceso de
and create
participación,
a barrier to
así como
participate,
la participación de
as
las
well
personas
as
migrantes
engagement
que
of migrants,
muchas veces se vinculan en sectores
because
económicos
oftentimes
que
they
se,
want to be linked to
que se
economic
caracterizan
systems
por
that
una
are known
participación menor
for a lower
en el acceso o en
participation
la integración de los
into
sistemas de seguridad
access
social. Por ejemplo,
to social
pequeños
security or protections.
emprendimientos que están más en el sector informal, algunas personas en el sector agrícola
Entrepreneurships,
o
agricultural
sectores
sector,
rurales
rural
o
sectors,
trabajo, por ejemplo, el trabajo doméstico.
or
Las personas, por ende, migrantes, tienen
homework.
mayor reto para
Migrants have a
operar
higher
dentro de los sistemas de
challenge to
seguridad social,
be
pero en un
in
marco
social security, but
donde
in a
los
frame
propios sistemas de
whereas their
seguridad
own
social
social
tienen
security
el reto
systems
también
have the
de
challenge as
incorporar
well
a
to
las personas
incorporate
nacionales y
their
por supuesto a las
nationals
personas migrantes,
and
pero que
obviously
tienen retos
migrants as well,
inherentes,
but they
intrínsecos,
have
que son importantes de considerar. Queremos
challenges
dar
that are
dos
important
ejemplos
to
más o menos para
consider.
mostrar cuál
And
es
I
de
have
alguna
2
forma
examples to show you
cómo está nuestra región en
how
el
our
marco
region is
de la
ranking
extensión de la
on
cobertura
the
y la
extension of
participación de
coverage
personas
and the
nacionales como personas
engagement of
migrantes.
nationals
Hay
and
países,
migrants as well.
definitivamente, bueno, es una
There are
región
countries
heterogénea,
where
hay
this is a
países donde
heterogeneous region. There are
alcance de extensión
countries
de la
where
cobertura
as the
puede ser
scope
alto,
of coverage can be
Costa Rica
high,
o como Uruguay, y otros que
in
tal
Costa
vez
Rica and
tienen
Uruguay,
mucha
and
menor
others where they
cobertura.
will have a lower
La
coverage.
participación de las personas, esto
Engagement
también en
of
algunos países,
people,
¿verdad? Vemos
and
que,
we have to recognize that in certain
por ejemplo,
countries,
países algunos en Centroamérica
certain
tienen
countries,
menor
some in
cobertura
Central
a
America,
nivel
have a lower
nacional y que por ende
coverage at a domestic
la
level, and
posibilidad
therefore
de
the
incorporar a las
possibility of
personas migrantes
incorporating
dentro de los
migrants
sistemas
within
de protección social
the
es un gran
social
reto, pero
protection
también
system is a huge
ciertamente
challenge,
para las
but
personas
also
nacionales.
for the
Este segundo ejemplo
nationals.
también
So
nos
this
parece
second
bastante
example that you
importante
see
y
on
lo
your
que
screen is very
quiere dar
important
muestra es
because it is showing
reto que tienen los
the
sistemas
challenge
en tanto
that the systems have
que es la
regarding
participación de las personas o el acceso de las
the
personas en al
engagement or
menos
access of
uno de los
people
beneficios de la
in
protección
at least
social.
one of the benefits of social
Y ahí encontramos que cada
security
uno de los países es
protection.
diferente.
And we see that each country is
Aproximadamente
different.
el 95%
Around
de las personas en Uruguay
95%
pueden
of
tener
the
acceso
people in
y
Uruguay can have
probablemente podemos
access,
encontrar una
and maybe we can
institución o un
find
sistema
one
gubernamental, un
institution,
sistema
a government
mucho más robusto
system,
que
or a
permite
much more
abordar y
solid
gestionar
system
una
that
serie de
can
medidas de acuerdo a la capacidad
address some measures
y la
according to the management
institución de los
capacity
países
and
como Uruguay,
institutional
pero que en
capability
otros
that they
países
have in
pues
countries
hay
such as
que
Uruguay. But in
considerar
other
cuáles son los
countries,
retos que
you will
tienen
have
las
to consider
instituciones
the
para
challenges
poder
of the
hacer
institutions
frente
themselves
también
in
para
order
las
to
personas
face those
migrantes.
domestic
La cobertura,
um,
la protección, la protección y
challenges
la
of
cobertura de la seguridad
incorporating
social
nationals and
es
migrants into their protection
un
systems.
proceso
We
de
see
integración y
an
participación de
integration and
distintas políticas
participation
públicas que lo
process
conforman.
of different
La seguridad
public
social debe
policies that
entenderse
integrate it. Social security must be
no
understood
solamente como
not
aquellas
only
instituciones
as
que
those
están
institutions
directamente
that are
inscritas, ¿verdad?,
directly
en lo que son los sistemas de protección,
added or
sistemas de
included in the
pensión, acceso a salud, sino
pensions, access to
también
health, social
toda una
security,
serie
but
de
there is also a
diferentes
series of
ámbitos que lo
different
componen
areas that
y que
integrate
van
it
interrelacionados.
and that will be
Trabajar
interrelated
para
work
poder incorporar las
in order
personas
to be
migrantes
incorporated the
dentro
migrants
de un
within
sistema de seguridad
a
social que sea
social
eficiente,
security system that will be
que sea
efficient, that would be
coherente con las necesidades de las
coherent
personas,
according to the needs of
que
people,
sea
that would
que tenga
be
los recursos y
having the resources and that will be sustainable implies to consider the picture that we have in the screen as the different initiatives. They are a system that will be protecting them and to generate the insurances, pensions, and a series of protection areas that are incorporated. But there are other policies that have also to be integrated. Let's see, that would be labor. ILO is mentioning that in Latin America, on average for year 2023, 48% of the people that are working are in the formal sector, in the informal sector. 1 out of 2 people are outside of the labor system. Therefore, it is very important to have those considerations of those behaviors, which are the types of trends to which this labor movement is going. We need to see the labor programs to include people, the care systems that is addressing women's inclusion in labor, but there are also other considerations that have to do with labor, like instances that will be guaranteeing labor protection, conditions of work. Conditions have to be met for all people alike, nationals or migrants, compliance with a minimum wage or adoption of politics with a minimum wage, and a series of different areas that will have an impact in the possibility that people can be integrated in the framework of migration, the type of policies that have to do with the regularization, permits, associated costs, legal barriers, or opportunity barriers, that even if they are the international are guaranteed as well as legislation, not necessarily they are met, not necessarily they are informed, and not necessarily people would have access to them. So we must acknowledge at all times that it is precisely the integration of social security that must be understood as an articulated process in each of these stages, which will enable us to have participation, engagement, coverage of migrant people in social security systems. It is very important for us during the debates to acknowledge each of these different areas. We have to acknowledge them. Once we have acknowledged them, see what will be their interrelation, their integration in order to foster policies in favor of migrants. What experience at ILO tells us when we want to promote policies of migrants within social security systems? The first that we see is that I had already mentioned previously, it is the way that social security works in different countries determines access to migrants. In other words, what we want to say here is that it is very important to acknowledge what and how the social security systems are integrated in the countries. What is their effective capacity in order to respond to the different challenges? How are they being constituted? How do they articulate with different initiatives and policies that are part of this integration framework? What are the resources? What is the possibility of developing programs, and how these programs will be viable or be sustainable? It is very important to acknowledge the possibility of seeing how that picture of different social security systems is. And if we see it, we will be able to design initiatives or see what the scope is. What something that's very important, and we will say that from an organization that has a very good control system and it's formal and consolidation and production of international standards for work labor is equal treatment between legislation and international instruments. I think that Ambassador Andara has already mentioned it. It is a right. Equal treatment is an obligation of the states to give to all people alike. So the options of national instruments, adoption of conventions, international agreements, as we will be seeing later on, it is a key element. Why? Because those are the umbrellas that enable us to address as a frame where policies can be fostered, but it is or promoted. But it's not only the adoption of this instrument is what we need to say. We have to enforce them effectively, and that is what will enable us to take advantage of those instruments. Oftentimes, we can see that we have a promotion of the instruments of this type, but how can we guarantee that each of these promotions of these different options of instruments, of legal instruments, will really lead us to have implementation mechanisms to make out of that agreement a reality? We have mentioned it in the past. The way to incorporate all of these stages is very important to see the strategies and procedures in place. ILO is telling us how can we identify the particularities of migrants, governments, can they contribute, can they not financially? The different kinds of strategies can acknowledge one, which was they are, two, that they can respond to migrants and needs. And then we have the international agreements, bilateral and multilateral agreements. These are very useful agreements. However, it does not mean that they can respond necessarily to all the needs, to all contexts, to all environments in the same way. So that demands attention. There are some bilateral agreements that are addressed on how people that are linked to the formal sector take advantage and continue to have access to social security from the country of origin and host country. But 70% of informality will be found in one country, and then we have another one that has the development of management that's quite high, and there's another one that has a lot of informalities with institutions that do not have the capacity in order to articulate politics and weak governance. Even if the agreement is very good, the incorporation of migrants can be much more complex. So what do we propose in order to address these dynamics? Well, to design differentiated strategies that will be considering certain dimensions that seem to us that are important. For instance, let's say that we can understand that strategies will be incorporated compliance to the norms, to the standards, that there will be specific instruments to monitor, to watch out for compliance, and how the different sectors, the companies, the countries create effective mechanisms to enforce rights and to be inclusive. This is one of the very important elements of social security access, to see what is the scope, solidarity, compulsory, and based on rights. And the third point is that they will be accessible, that they will be determined by the cost, the subsidies, the contributions that are received in the different countries, to see and figure out how they can be implemented, to see what is their viability, the fact of having sustainability and financing throughout time. Another element is a possibility that people can have access in an easy way to these social protection systems, a very key element for migrants. Formalities should be easy, that people can be taken care of, to provide them information in their own language, to be found where the people, to find all that where people work, and to be prepared as to have differentiated mechanisms for people that just to give you an example that comes to mind, asylum seekers. Asylum seekers is an individual that is in a process of migration, that within the frame that they are in transit to receive their status of refugees, can be on hold for 2-3 years times, while not all the institutions know what are the frameworks for each one of these individuals. But it is important for them to have access to this kind of information in a very easy way, and then can identify what are the different formalities that they have to meet. And incentives, how can we promote mechanisms as to companies consider, employers consider that there are elements that enable to strengthen the incorporation of individuals, and the individuals could be considering that it is appealing to them and that they will have much more benefits if they incorporate what are the promotion policies for them to be having the right and the possibility of actors to consider that, yes, there is a benefit of that to be incorporated in the social security systems. ILO, for that purpose, develops a strategy that is based on these 5 spheres, but that have to be followed in different stages. First, the diagnostic. You have to acknowledge or recognize all these feasibility studies with context, understanding how is the legal framework, how our social security systems are integrated, how administrative processes are in place, what is the legal framework, among others. And then you have to have this picture, and this picture is very important. And then you will be able to do some mapping on the coverage. Once that these institutions, these policies, these strategies, we can see them within the frame of the system, well, we have to figure out what the scope is and see the percentage of participation. Let's see what is the degree of viability as of the changes and processes that will be taking place in the labor market, or that the socialization will have. Another of the elements that ILO considers as very important for migration, labor-wise, is the possibility of being able to identify, in addition of having a good picture, having the context, having the mapping of the scope, the possibility of identifying certain groups or determine certain priorities during implementation. Strategies that could be successful are those that can be identifying different areas and moving forward certain groups, certain sectors, certain areas that will enable them to move forward. A case, if you allow me to mention, that has been successful is Costa Rica. Back in year 2019, during the incorporation of domestic work for women, whereas there was a great participation of migrants, it is a sector that has 140,000 people, and the Caja Costarricense, in a dialogue with employers, as well as with the domestic women organizations and women institutions and mechanism of governance and dialogue, have created a specific instrument for women, for domestic workers, whereas 85% of that sector is being represented by women. Then we have the design of specific strategies and the goal groups and what are the routes, see how these processes are being implemented, monitoring and assessment of those in order to readjust, modify the processes, and acknowledge if the people are really being linked, the migrants are really being linked to it, and how can they do it in a much more effective way. And to close, what we believe is that if we identify the population conveniently, if we understand and we can promote this social security framework in a full way, we will be guaranteeing economic security for persons that are subject to falling into poverty or be in a vulnerability status. It has to accelerate integration with population and society, it strengthens cohesion and social stability, and then it will improve the countries to be benefited because it will improve labor productivity and the well-being of the individuals, and not only of the persons that are working, but of their families as well. It contributes to financing of the social protections to the countries of host countries because they will be paying their taxes. So we have the possibility of the country receiving much more resources and be institutions that will be strengthened. And then we will be combating child labor and other types of labor. And a part of the regional strategy of the ILO on labor, migration, and human mobility is a strategy that we have been promoting. And we will keep on promoting until year 2030. It is a strategy short and middle term, and that will be incorporated social protection and cohesion as a specific topic. It involves different axles for decent labor, as we were saying, but with this, I would like to close by saying, on the behalf of ILO, this is not only our role to promote this framework of labor, of decent work, but also in projects, our department promotes how to promote and make migrants be engaged, how to identify them, how to generate information, how to generate policies. And having said that, I want to thank you all. Count on us to participate in the dialogue processes and in the promotion of decent labor for migrants. Thank you so much. I apologize that I exceeded the time allotted, and I thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. Thank you so much, Maestro Juan Ignacio. Quite interesting. We would love to have a couple of time to be hearing you in a lengthy manner because there are so many topics that we could be talking in further detail. But I think that in the questions that will be raised, we will be able to talk in much more specific detail on what we have heard during the presentations. We need to know what the conditions are, the structure, not only of the host countries and the origin countries of migrants, and the different conditions that the nationals have, because that is another thing that we assume as granted within this structure and the development of strategies and policies. But it is very important to take in consideration of having the right profile of migrants. Normally, in this south to south migration flows, identifying the profiles of migrants is much more complex. It has become, let's say, necessary to have the integration of much more actors and players. And I would add to identify the roles of institutions and the ownerships of those roles, those institutions towards the policies that are being created, because that is also a topic that all countries, I would dare to say, I have had the opportunity of participating in programs that is multi-country, and that we need to figure out how we will have that ownership of these programs that when you analyze it, it seems good based on practice and diagnosis with already proven experiences and well documented. But sometimes the problem is to see the ownership of the role of institutions vis-a-vis social security and protection systems and the people that are already in the national context and migrants as well.
Also, how to make and design national proposals with all its characteristics. And definitely, they must be more simpler. This is something that we see that's very interesting because this is exactly one of the main challenges that we have on Latin American countries, especially those who are becoming the destination countries, which is something new to them. We will briefly go to the question sections that were deemed for our for our participating team. Prior to this, I would like to make a brief presentation of those who are joining us as experts on this topic of social and economic inclusion and access to social security of migrants. We have Mr. Juan Ignacio, now we will have from the Latin American economic system, who studied in National University of Mexico. He's also he studied in the University of Valle de Mexico. He now is representing LAES. And apart from that, he's a specialist on topics on sustainable development and comprehensive systems for risk management. He has also worked in the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Relations. He also has been working as head of department of ICLAC and the Bolivarian Alliance of American Countries. During 2020-2021, he led the pro-tempore chair of ECLAC in Mexico, and he has been worked on professor on full-time as well. Another of
participantes el
our
día de hoy es la doctora Ana
participants
Lucía
is Dr.
Fernández
Ana Lucia
de
Fernandez,
la Universidad Estatal a
who studied
Distancia.
on the State
Quien es investigadora del
University
Instituto
on
de Estudios
distance.
del
She
Género.
is a researcher on gender
Es
studies.
doctora en Sociología en la
She
Universidad
is a
Libre de
doctor
Berlín,
on
Alemania.
by the
Cuenta con una
Berlin
especialización
University,
en políticas
Free
de
Berlin
cuidado con
University
perspectiva de
in Germany.
género del aclaso y es
She has worked
licenciada en
in
bachiller en
Flaxo as
Sociología
well on
por
gender
la
studies,
Universidad de Costa Rica.
and she
También es
also
Premio
has
Nacional
a
por la
degree
Igualdad y Equidad de
by.
Género Ángela Acuña Braun de la
Oh,
edición
sorry, we also have Dr.
2023-2024 de
Angela
Costa Rica.
Acuña Bravo in
Es
Costa Rica.
investigadora del Instituto
She
de
is a
Estudios del Género de la Universidad
researcher
Estatal a Distancia de
on
Costa
gender
Rica y
studies
ha sido profesora
in
de la
Costa Rica
Maestría
Distance University.
Académica en
She has been a
Estudios de las
professor
Mujeres, Género y
of
Sexualidad
women
en el programa de
studies
estudios de posgrado
in
y de la Escuela de
postgraduate
Sociología de la
studies
Universidad de
and the
Costa Rica.
sociology
También ha dirigido
school in Costa
investigaciones
Rica.
en el
She has
Centro
also led
Centroamericano
research
en
on the
Población
Central
de la misma casa de
America
enseñanza
Center in
y
Central America
tiene diversas
in that very
publicaciones en temas
university.
relacionados a su trabajo,
She has
migración y género
been
y
done
cuidados,
research on gender
fronteras
and
transnacionales,
safeguard,
feminización de la migración,
feminization of
posturas de hogar
migration,
femeninas, uso del tiempo, políticas
feminine
públicas de cuidado con
health
perspectivas de
of
género, entre otros.
household, gender studies,
También
among
tenemos la
others.
participación del doctor
We also have
Edwin
the
Rolando
participation of
García
Dr.
del Instituto
Edwin
Guatemalteco
Rolando
de
Garcia
Seguridad
from the
Social,
Guatemalan
quien es jefe
Center
del
for
Departamento
Social Security.
Actuarial y Estadístico.
He is the head of
Edwin es doctor
statistics.
en
He
economía,
is also
con
an
especialidad
economist
en economía de
with
la
a
salud de la
specialization
tercera
in
sección de
health
posgrado de la Organización
economy
Iberoamericana de
and in
Seguridad Social
healthcare
de Madrid, España. Estudió en la Asociación
by Madrid,
Internacional de la
Spain
Seguridad Social en la
University,
ciudad de
and
Montevideo.
he studied also in
También
Montevideo.
del trabajo actuarial para la seguridad social y aprobó el posgrado
He
en
also approved
modelación
the
estadística en la
postgraduate
Facultad
studies
de
in
Economía de
statistics
la
in
USAC.
economics
Se
on
graduó en
USAC.
posgrado en estadística inferencial en la
He also
Universidad
had
Rafael
differential
Landívar y
statistics
de la
in the
maestría
Rafael
en
Landívar
economía del Consorcio de
University in
Universidades
the
de
Consortium of
Tilburg,
Universities of
Holanda,
Tilburg
la
in
Universidad de
the
Wageningen
Netherlands,
en el Reino de los
in the
Países Bajos y
Wageningen
la
University
Escuela de Economía
in
de
the
Amsterdam.
Netherlands as well.
Y finalmente tenemos la
Finally, we
participación,
have the
nuestros
participation
últimos dos panelistas.
of our two
Tenemos al
members of the
licenciado
panel.
Aaron
We
Eric
have
Álvarez del
Mr.
Sistema Nacional de
Aaron
Protección
Eric
Integral
Alvarez,
de
who is
Niños, Niñas
part
y
of the
Adolescentes de CIPINA
integrate
de México. Es
of the
responsable de políticas de
Mexican
protección de niñas,
branch
niños y
or
adolescentes en
of
situación
office
de
that
movilidad.
protects women
Realiza la
and
licenciatura
children and
de
teenagers
estudios
in
latinoamericanos
migration.
en la UNAM
He studied
y el
in UNAM,
licenciado en
and
Administración y
he
Gestión
is
Pública por el Instituto de
also
Investigación
an
de
attorney
Investigación Ortega y
in
Gasset.
by the Ortega and
Desempeñó
Y
diversos
Gasset
cargos
Center
en
of Studies.
la Secretaría de
He
Relaciones
has
Exteriores
had
y también
different
en el
roles
INAMI y en
in
la
the
Secretaría de
Mexican
Gobernación,
Foreign
relacionados con el
Relationships
tema justamente de
Ministry,
migración
and
y
he has
relaciones
been working on
internacionales.
migration
Colaboró en la
and
Conferencia Interamericana de
he
Seguridad
has also
Social
been
en la
part of the
promoción de la
conference of
portabilidad de los derechos de los trabajadores
international
migrantes,
mobility
la
in pro
vinculación
of
con la democracia y
migrants,
la relación con otros organismos
the linking with
internacionales.
other
También participó en la
international
creación de
bodies.
la
He
Conferencia
also
Regional sobre
participated in
Migración,
creating
la elaboración
migration
de la Ley de
conferences,
Migración y
the
otros
law of
proyectos.
migration, and the program We Are Mexico.
También ha participado, actualmente está a cargo en la
He is
dirección de
currently
políticas de protección
heading
de
the
niños, niñas y
politics
adolescentes
of protection of
en el
children and
Sistema Nacional de
teenagers
Protección
in
Integral de
the
Niños, Niñas y Adolescentes de
comprehensive
CIPINA de la
program
propia
of
Secretaría de
CEPINAL of
Gobernación.
the
Y
Ministry
finalmente
of
tenemos la
Governance,
participación
the
de la doctora Luisi
internal affairs, and we will
Pedrosa
also
del
have
Colmex,
Luisi
del Colegio de México,
Pedrosa
quien
from
es
Colmex, the
coordinadora
Mexican college,
académica de la
who
maestría en Ciencia
is
Política
a
y
Master's
Centro de
of
Estudios
Political Sciences
Internacionales.
in
Ella es doctora en Ciencia
Foreign Studies.
Política por la
She
Universidad de Bremen.
studied in the Bremen University,
Su trabajo
and
es precisamente
her work
interdisciplinario,
is
combinando
interdisciplinary. She combines
combinando perspectivas politológicas y sociológicas,
politics and
concretamente en la intersección de los
social
estudios comparativos
sciences
de
with
políticas
comparative
migratorias y de
studies
ciudadanía y
in
nacionalidad. En la
regarding
última década, su
migration.
investigación se ha centrado en los dilemas que enfrentan
Her
las
research
democracias
has
liberales para
been
integrar a
based
políticas
on
nuevas a
liberal
los
policies
migrantes, tanto
to
migrantes como inmigrantes, a la
face
vida política y
migrants
también
and
ha
to
sido
integrate them in
investigadora
politics.
visitante
She
en
has
Yale,
also
en el
been
Instituto de
a
Ciencias
visiting
Sociales de la Universidad de
professor in
Lisboa,
Yale
el
and
European
in Lisboa
University
University,
Institute, la Central European University y
also in
la
Central
Universidad Libre
European
de Berlín.
University and the
La
Free
doctora Lucy
University of
Pedrosa es profesora
Berlin. She has
investigadora del
also
Centro Internacional
worked
del
as a
Colegio de
professor
México.
in the Colegio
También
de México,
es investigadora asociada
and she's
del
also
Instituto
a fellow
de Estudios
in the
Latinoamericanos.
Institute
Actualmente
of
Lucy
German
Pedrosa
Institute,
es la
and
coordinadora
she's
académica de
currently
la maestría en
the
Ciencia
academic
Política del Centro de
coordinator
Estudios
of the Master
Internacionales.
of Political
Pues
Science
como ven,
of
tenemos
the
un panel
International Studies
amplio
Center.
y bastante
We have quite a panel to have a dialogue that is pretty nurturing on this topic that detains us today. And for that, I will open the floor to our members of the panel with the first question, which is, what is your opinion on how including migrants can improve economic growth and sustainable growth? If anyone wants to take the floor, you are welcome to do so.
Hola, Merari. Buenos días
Hi,
a todos.
Merari, and welcome everyone. First, I would like to give a broad perspective and talk from our LAES perspective and the integration perspective that we want to give for Latin America and the Caribbean. We want to remind you that we are a regional intergovernment organization that tries to approach and to articulate all our general problems. We think this topic is truly interesting because sometimes social security is overlooked when looking at migration. It is really important as a comprehensive access, and we've been working with migration topics with different organizations, or ILO being one of them, and recently we are trying to enforce migration from a more positive point of view, a more integrating, because sometimes this is a topic that is polarizing and is a problem for regional policies. However, we need to take into account that the workforce is diverse, is dynamic, and it is a nexus for integration. And as countries, we need to take into account that migrants and migration need sustainable development. And we need to take into account that the experiences, the scholar background can enrich positively the workforce. From that point onwards and from education, we can take into account that we can boost all sectors that are key for the economy. And from that, we can have a job market that is more in depth. For instance, entrepreneurship and businessmen. We always need to take profit from all opportunities, and we need to contribute also to consuming for goods and services, and this is directly impacting the economic development of regions. So including migrants in economy can generate mutual relationships. We can contribute to a more sustainable economic growth, and therefore, as countries, we need to try to envision the potential of migrants and to maximize the benefits of the region and of the migration across the region. We need to include it as well as a promotion in public policy for the region in terms of migration, and we need to take into account that we need to look as well to the stories of success. So that is the vision that we have from LAES regarding migrants. Thank you very much, Gustavo. You approach really interesting topics, and I don't know if someone else wants to answer the question as well. Yes. Good morning. Pleasure to greet you. Well, regarding how can inclusion contribute to the economic growth and sustainable development, we would like to see how we can contribute. And I consider more than a question for the future is a question for the present. We are currently looking at migrants contributing to the economics of countries. In the Northern Triangle and Dominican Republic, the Inter-American Development Bank, regarding the money that is sent, they contribute around 22% of the GDP of the Northern Triangles. In regards of only remittances, and they are reducing inequality. We have a reduction of 2% in all countries except El Salvador, where they look at figures around 6% minus in terms of poverty. They also reduce inequality, and if we measure in the Gini measurement, we see a positive figures in a point. So we need to address that. It is a source of income for families, specifically for those who are in the lowest part of society. Migration helps to reduce extreme poverty more than the social programs that countries may have. On the northern triangles, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, 90% of remittances is being used by households to consume food. This is directly impacting extreme poverty, and it constitutes a support to reduce vulnerability in terms of nutrition. There are other factors such as healthcare for families and also education. In consequence, we need to see how to further point this participation so that they move from the day-to-day, from being able to eat today to be able to be healthy today and look towards the future. How can we include them in the pension system? How we can guarantee that when they reach the elder age, they are still able to have an economic life that is dignified, because our pension systems do not respond to a dignified future, but to a future where income can be guaranteed. That is my initial participation. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Tocaste un tema muy importante.
Thank you very much. You addressed an important topic about what they are currently doing for the economy. This is like a second part to what we are commenting with Gustavo. Also, what they are currently doing as a workforce. It is maybe important for people who are looking at this high-level dialogue, more than talking about a workforce, we would like to conceptualize these works like workforce. They contribute as a force, they bring something to the table, and it is a way to think about them in another way. This is not something that is going to happen. It is happening, and it has been happening from a historic perspective. It is really interesting looking at remittances, especially in Mexico. As of 2 years, it is larger than China in terms of remittances, and therefore countries, specifically for Central America, depend on a large scale on remittances. But as you mentioned, we need to think and to see the different contributions of one at the beginning, talking about how to make long-term strategies on remittances. Not on the long term, maybe they can reduce inequality for the day-to-day, but maybe we can create strategies to gain sustainability, to think about investment.
Eric, bueno, justamente todos los demás colegas, ¿no? Gustavo, sobre...
Just as Eric or Gustavo was mentioning, how to think about yields and performance, how to make these remittances act in another way. I don't know if someone can answer this question. Otherwise, we will go to the second question because we have a packed agenda. Remember that at the end, we will have questions that the participants make. This is time dependent, of course. This is available on the comments box. The second question is, which are the main challenges that migrants face when accessing the social security protections in their destination countries, and what are the policies that have been successful in different countries and contexts.
Bueno, yo puedo comenzar con algunas reflexiones para animar a las y los demás colegas quizá. Y en términos de desafíos, yo
I
creo
will
que
begin.
pues en realidad
In
queda
terms of
poco
challenges,
que agregar a la presentación magistral que
I
hizo
think that
tanto
there is little to add
fue
to
realmente
the
muy
presentation of
completa
Dr.
y que
Juan
quedó muy
Ignacio
bien
Castillo.
dentro de
It
los
is perfect
desafíos,
and it
pero yo quisiera a lo mejor
talked about
enfocarme en un
challenges very
aspecto que
well.
tiene más bien una dimensión política y
I would like
que toca
to
tal
go
vez la
into
primera
politics,
pregunta, en el
and that is
sentido
regarding the
de
first question a
a
little bit,
veces imaginamos que una manera de promover la
because we
inclusión de los
imagine that
migrantes
promoting inclusion of
es
migrants
cambiar la narrativa.
equals
Y creo que es
changing the
muy
narrative.
importante. Sin duda el asunto de la
And that
narrativa,
is truly
de
important.
hablar
This
de la
narrative
migración como
of
una
talking about
oportunidad,
migration
como un
as an
recurso para el
opportunity,
desarrollo
as a
sostenible,
resource
para el
for
crecimiento
sustainable
económico de los
development,
países,
for
para
economic
reducir
growth in countries,
la desigualdad, como
to
ya
reduce
mencionó también
inequality,
el doctor Edwin Rolando García hace unos
as Dr.
minutos.
Edwin
Todo eso
Rolando Garcia mentioned a couple of minutes ago. All of that is important.
pero mucho de ello depende, o digamos
But
que se puede
most of
potenciar
that
mucho más
depends on can be boosted
en la medida que los estados asumen
if
también su rol
states assume
como
their role
potenciadores y
as
facilitadores de ese
boosters and
proceso y no
facilitators of this
solamente
process,
se retraen y observan
not
que los
only
migrantes en
getting a
efecto
backseat and
son un
looking at
recurso porque
migrants
migran
as a resource
la
because they are
mayoría a edades más
migrating,
productivas,
most
que
of them in
generan
their productive age,
emprendimientos, ya sea
because
dentro del
they
mercado
generate
formal o
entrepreneurship
informal,
in formal
que
or
obviamente
informal
también son
job
parte del
markets.
consumo,
They
de
are
la
part of the
economía, porque
consumption of the
generan nuevos
economy.
servicios y con ellos nuevos
They
mercados,
generate
¿no?
new services and new
Porque
markets.
constituyen un bono demográfico,
They are a
etcétera. Muchas,
demographic
muchas
bonus.
razones
There are
que
tons of
son
reasons
obvias, ¿no? Para las
that are
cuales las
obvious
personas migrantes no necesitan
for
mucho del
which
Estado para
migrants do
generar
not
un
need a
impacto
lot from the
positivo.
state to generate an
Pero eso se
important
puede potenciar en
economic
la medida que los
benefit, but
estados
this can be
reconocen su
boosted
papel
as
en
states acknowledge
considerar
their
a
role
los
and their
perfiles
responsibility
por vía de
in
políticas
including them
públicas. Y
in
la medida en
public
que esa
policies.
inclusión es formal,
As this
de
is
verdad
a
que
formal
potencia todos
inclusion,
estos
it
efectos
can boost all of these
económicos, ¿no?
effects
Y
in
por
the
ello es
economy.
importantísimo.
That's why it is so
Es un
important.
proceso que va
It
más
is
allá
a
del
process
narrativo
that
y que
is
requiere una consideración
beyond
muy
the
seria de
narrative
políticas
and
públicas
that needs a serious consideration
individuales
in
muy
public policy
profundos en cada país, ¿no? Porque
in
como
different
también
countries. Because,
decía Juan Ignacio
as
Castillo
Juan
en
Ignacio
una de sus
was
primeras
saying
slides,
in its
pues sí, la
first
cuestión
slides of
migratoria
presentations,
de los países
the
de la región
profiles
se
of
vuelve
migration
muy
in the
compleja,
region has
¿cierto?
become more
Pero
and more
todavía hace
complex.
falta que las políticas públicas
However,
reflejen esa
public
complexión.
policies still need to
Muchas de nuestras
reflect this
políticas
complexity.
públicas, por lo menos en México y en
Most of public
Centroamérica, han sido
policies in Mexico and
focalizadas
Central America
en permitir
are
migración, sobre todo
attend
caracterizada
are
por
addressed
la
for a
emigración,
migrating
¿no? Y por
policy
supuesto que si
that is
vemos esto en
immigration.
términos
And if we look at this in
numéricos,
terms
sigue
of
siendo así.
figures,
Tenemos una
it is still
enorme
the reality.
población
We
de
have a
migrantes, una
huge
enorme comunidad
population
en la
that is
diáspora, ¿no?
leaving
Bueno,
their
principalmente
homes,
concentrada en
mostly
países
focused on
de
countries
Norteamérica, Estados Unidos, Canadá.
that are
Sin
looking to migrate
embargo,
to the
ya
US and
estos
Canada.
países de la región se han
However,
vuelto
these
países de
regional
inmigración,
countries
de
have been
tránsito y también de
destination
migración
countries
interna.
and
Y
transit
estos
and
son
internal
desafíos
migration.
gigantescos que
And these are
requieren un
huge challenges
replanteamiento
that
de nuestras políticas
call
públicas
for
para ya no pensar
reposing
nada
our
más en la
public
inclusión de
policies
la
so that we
población
don't
de
think only
migrantes,
about
¿no?
those
El
who
mucho de
leave
lo que
their
se ha dicho
home.
apenas, por
Because most
ejemplo,
of the
el
discourse that we
desarrollo
have
de
had
programas de
recently, like
procesamiento de
developing
remesas, es
a
importantísimo,
program to
pero
have
sigue reflejando
remittances
esa visión de
more
políticas
effective
públicas de países
in the
volcados
market,
hacia
this is
afuera.
a policy
Mientras que
towards
en el
the
presente,
population in
en los últimos
diaspora.
10 años, sobre todo en los últimos
But on the
5,
last decade
tenemos el
or
desafío de la
five
inclusión de
years,
personas
we have the
que
challenge
están en
of
tránsito.
including those who are in transit.
Y eso de verdad que es un desafío gigantesco,
And that is a
porque
huge
nos pone
challenge
frente
because
a la situación de, primero,
we are in a
la
situation where,
regularidad.
first of all, we
¿En qué
have the
medida la
regularity.
regularidad es un
And in what extent this
obstáculo o
regularity
no para el
poses
acceso a
an obstacle to access social security mechanisms and for basic services such as education and healthcare. In most Latin American countries and the Caribbean, irregularity is not an obstacle to gain access to healthcare. This is on paper, obviously. However, on the implementation, we have this huge challenge that a great part of the administration of the state and the administration of public health services are not aware that we do not constitute any crime by migrating. This irregularity can be solved, and it must not be a legal obstacle to have access to healthcare and to education. So we need to seriously go in depth and re-educate the state apparatus across all their levels, even in the local level, which is the entry level for direct contact with migrants, so that we can actually enforce these rights. And by that, I mean raise awareness on the role that is much more complex on migration and to reflect them in public policies. Thank you very much for your contribution. They are really good points, especially on the political dimension, as we mentioned a little bit. We need to reframe and to gain another vision on the phenomenon that we shouldn't be calling phenomenon. Actually, this is something that's very day to day that has been happening since forever, and the migration system and how the states respond to their role. This is something that we've been chatting from the beginning. We have a question also regarding irregularity. Maybe we can go to that topic. And I don't know if someone else from our panel of experts wants to answer this question. Otherwise, we can move forward.
Ahorita que ya estamos hablando sobre el tema de las limitantes, como bien decías,
and as we were talking about limiting factors, Juan broadened and we went a little bit over time, but I believe we also went into the questions that we are dealing with right now. One of the limiting factors, regardless of the profile or the education levels, is the topic of access to information, access to which is the acknowledgement of the rights of the people from the first step, which is the information about the rights. From that point onwards, the state needs to appropriate the public works. Also, private parties need to do their role, and they need to appropriate towards the migrants. And also, definitely, this begins from a step where migrants acknowledge their rights, they know about their rights, they know which institutions they need to go in case of any violation, so that they can exercise their rights. Especially talking about social security, health, education, healthcare education, access to house, and social economic integration. For the third question, we would like to talk more about specifics. Talking about this lack of homogenization of migrants, because we have profiles that are as varied as humans there are, we need to promote economic autonomy of migrant women. We know that this is a complex topic that needs to be approached from a different perspective. And we need to prevent we need to foster gender perspective. So the question is, which are the challenges that women migrants face when trying to access social services and the job market? So for that, maybe Dr. Ana Lucia Fernandez can answer this question. Yes, thank you very much, Melody, and thank you for this space. I would also like to congratulate Juan Ignacio's presentation. I believe this is very complete. But now we will talk a little bit about some topics that he mentioned. First of all, I would like to begin by saying that I am a specialist mostly in the case of Costa Rica. Therefore, I will talk about examples on that country. But for this question, the first thing that we need to understand is how to understand migration from a gender perspective, because if we have that, we can address policies that are more efficient to gain this access for social security. Therefore, I think it is important to start talking about feminization in migration. Not something about women migrating together in these migrating processes. We know that increasingly women are the ones who take the hold of their own migration due to different factors, but these are autonomous people going and leaving their families or going to their families and inserting themselves and looking for international protection or due to economic factors or due to any other cause. So I think this is the result not only about the phenomenon itself, but about a lack of citizenship, especially in our region. They lack human rights and autonomy. We know that, for instance, in Nicaragua, they have one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancies worldwide. Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala as well, they have femicide rates that are one of the highest in the world, along with the Dominican Republic. This is a picture of our societies, and this is a cause of women leaving their countries. And one of the most interesting things is that we've worked with the Texas University in research with migrant women that cross through Costa Rica. We know that Costa Rica is a destination, it is a transit country. It, not as many people leave the country, but it has these characteristics. And we've noticed that many of the women that suffer gender violence that come to the country or that are in transit do not know that gender violence is the cause that they are leaving their country. They do so not when they are threatened, but when their children's lives are threatened. So they are the ones who leave and expose themselves, but when their children are threatened, they make the decision to leave the country. There is a normalization also of gender violence, not only physical violence, but also of their goods and their families. However, their families and the state make them not only victims but also responsible, so they lack networks of support to face such a critical event that makes them take the hard decision to leave their home, disregarding gender violence. But when we address women leaving their countries, we need also to talk about migration corridors and the global care change, because this is, well, the capitalist system reproduces this type of situations, this type of chains of countries that need care, and they, as women, are the subject that actually finds a job in their destination country. For instance, in Costa Rica, as Juan Ignacio was saying, is a well-known fact that plenty of women come to work in remunerated house chores as work. So one of the challenges and one practice that is good, so to speak, has been organizing. I consider that social organization are key to truly achieve what it takes Like, for instance, we were talking about the Costa Rica achievements.
There are several organizations. We have the Domestic Women of Costa Rica organization, and we have the network. And these three organizations are the ones that are taking the lead to promote the rights of domestic workers. They have an interinstitutional organization, or ILO is an observer. We also have the Ministry of Labor, the Women's Ministry, and they have really promoted some rights. And there is also a table with the Federation of Restifum. So they are really, those are organizations of domestic workers, migrants, and they are the ones that are leading that topic at a social organization. Their domestic remunerated labor has been acknowledged. They have been moving forward to have the ratification of 2009 of ILO. And then what your colleague has mentioned, there is a new regulation to register employers and domestic workers, and that was approved in 2017, and that gives them Social Security coverage for domestic workers, and then you have the rights to economic benefits, pension fund, and a scale of a minimum wage. And all of this has been very positive things for the fight that these women have undergone. It is the women from Nicaragua that are really moving forward with this topic. However, even if this is quite positive for the country when we see the data, yes, we see that when this regulation was approved 2019, the employers that are ensuring those domestic workers went from 12,500 to 14,200. So when we take a look at the data, we see only that 16% of the women that are working on this domestic work are insured. 23% do not have any kind of insurance, and the rest are, yes, they are insured. They are insured because there's a family member that is being insured and not by being insured by its employer. And so a very low number, 15%, are being insured by the state. So really, we see that, yes, of course, we have been moving forward, but at the end of the day, there's so much to do. It is really linked to a cultural topic that remunerated domestic work is considered that is not really a job because it's what you normally do as domestic chores. And well, yes, you have to create a specific contracts because they say that sometimes they are being paid and it is the wage, the worst paid wage, $400 and per month, and non-qualified is really around $120 for a non-trained worker. So you see the difference on that gap. So there are families that really ask them to do other tasks like attending to school meetings when they have been hired to do domestic chores, and they are taking or assuming care jobs. And CISS is a job that is associated to women's role. Then one of the demands or one of the goals that they are fighting for is to really, within the jurisdiction, really have a contract work contract and describing their job, because we need to improve the wages, give much more value culturally wise to this type of jobs and include them, because they are women, around 30% or so, that are remunerated domestic workers are women migrants. So this is how we have been dealing with this topic in Costa Rica. But I think that it is important that we have to really have a cross-section within ministries and have an architecture articulate at a political level, legislative level, not only on take in account the migration legislation, but we have to have much more public policies take into account the reality of migrants, because we have to have a very good policy of care, and we need to make it possible for migrants to have access to those services so they can go work and be trained, and they really make a profession out of this work, and so they can be incorporated. But at the same time, we will be increasing the value and the wages of that type of domestic work. So I think that's all on my behalf, and now I will allow others to speak. Well, that was a quite extended answer, Ana Lucia. Definitely, indeed, it is a topic that is so lengthy, and we could take a lot of time to discuss it. Licenciado Aaron wants to contribute. Thank you. I agree with you that this topic per se is a great topic. It is core in this debate at this forum. And I would like to allude to the item of the question you've asked on gender violence. I think that the things that we can do in order to prevent gender violence, because sadly, migrants are also a very large group among the victims of this phenomenon. What I want to allude is what we do here in Mexico in order to prevent gender violence. But I would like to start by commenting on what Licenciado Juan José said during his presentation. I do believe that a very important action in which all countries are already working on, but it's important to highlight in order to have the mechanism and actions to strengthen it, is migration regularization, to the extent that we have migration flows that will be regular, that we were coordinating from public institutions with the offices of the United Nations participating. We could really be working for women that I think that should be taken care of as in priority, so they can really be drawn out from this scenario where they are much more vulnerable. In the case of Mexico, in addition of working on the design of public policies that would favor and regular migration, we are working under commissions, and I want to refer to the human trafficking commission, where we promote actions that would be foreseeing the different mechanisms, whereas most of the victims, as I was saying a while ago, sadly are women, and they would be favored from those actions that are developed by the security institutions, so they won't be migrated in the dark, so they would not be derouted from their path, and they could really benefit from the support that is provided by the Mexican government to the migrants, and they can also have access to the civil society and really go through a much more secure pathway. So this is my comment, and I would love to intervene later on. Thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions. I am glad that you also addressed this topic, but because if we talk about gender violence and prevention of violation of rights, it has to do with women's topics, the prevention of crime, that per se, just because they are women, we are at a higher risk statistically. Normally, women migrants that come in these new flows, as it has been said previously, they can be head of families, and independently, they are now facing these risks, including the boys, girls, and teenagers that they are protecting while migrating. So it is a broad topic that we could keep on discussing of how we can adjust the public policies of being able to develop them based not only on talking about local population, but vis-a-vis the specific risks that women migrants have to face during transit and host countries. There are statistics that are horrible of using that adjective. I, with a great pleasure, could share with you some of my research and diagnosis that we have done in the Central American corridor and Mexico regarding domestic work women migrants. And all the processes, not only on political topic, on cultural topics, it is those are things that are very important. Access to rights, identification of women per se, of women migrant on the normalization of migrants, and not only in host countries, but unfortunately, this normalization of violence comes from the country of origin. So it is quite complex for women migrant not only to have access to information, but recognize this information as a right that they can exert, they can demand the host country. So it is a vicious cycle, quite interesting on how we can extend the policies of care to the family members of migrant women. So those migrant women that are being autonomous during their processes, they can have in a much more equitable access to Social Security. And from having that Social Security, have access to the networks. And those networks will not be like an image of having a couple or a men supporting them, but also friends that can support them through their country of origin. Prevention of gender violence is also a very important topic, and I thank you for bringing it up. And in order to conclude, we will have two more questions. Our next question is regarding how can we guarantee that in child migrants, and I hope that our colleague from CIMA can share with you, we can guarantee that the children would receive quality education and appropriate health care, and that is really linked to what we just mentioned. Please go ahead. Precisely, Muriel. Once again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I take advantage to thank the organizers of this event, the opportunity of joining us of joining you today. You mentioned, yes, another vulnerable, highly vulnerable group on migration, and this is children. Talking about childhood, when we are talking about economic actors, you might say it doesn't make sense. But I think that it is so timely to talk about child migration because we need to renew our narratives and see teenagers and children actors of social security. Normally, they are not the economic agent that will be generating, but Social Security has a purpose at its core, family. And family has as very important aspects childhood and teenagers. Mexico is a country, and well, all of our countries in the region, generally, we see the 4 dimensions of migrations, and these 4 dimensions of migrations really highlight the needs to have a differentiated care for the different profiles that we take care of in Mexico. I want to center my participation in how we are acting here in Mexico, how I am participating as a public servant in this forum, and I want to tell you from the executive direction that is office that depends from the Ministry of the Interior as a strategy that we have put in place and have proven some results is the governance that has already mentioned by Ambassador Clarence this morning regarding the need of doing governance all around, and particularly on migration regarding children and teenagers. We believe that Mexico has a political and legal scaffold that is quite important. Unfortunately, this is only on the legal side, on the formal side. But what we are missing, as you were saying a while ago, Mireli, we need to really put it in place to execute it. And what we have done from the Ministry of the Interior, Gobernación in Mexico, and we have to include children in the 31 secretariats that we have around the country. And this is a fact. Now, what we are doing, or actions, are throughout these specialized commissions that take care of migrants that are located in the entire territory. We have now municipalities that have these commissions offices, and municipalities particularly where migration is really present in a large number. All sectors that are involved in care of children migrants with these collegiated bodies, and they are the ones that have to determine their needs and the mechanisms to take care of children, highlighting primary care for migrants that are in transit, but not only for them, but also in some municipalities, we have the phenomenon of the returnee migration that is quite important. Obviously, we are also working on topics such as education, inclusion of education for boys, girls, and teenagers that are born in Mexico, or children that are born from Mexican parents that were born abroad and that are coming back to Mexico to receive their education. And I think that you also mentioned that, Mireli, the importance to have an awareness on the social aspects, the right that all boys and girls have when they are in the Mexican territory. I think it wasn't you, Mirele, but it was another panel member that mentioned it a while ago. Our society must learn and be certain that all boys and girls that are in our country have the right to education. Obviously, for this purpose, we have been holding meetings with the technical secretary of the school board. These are boards that create instructions that are given to all the schools in our country in order to promote the right of boys and girls to have access to education from the Secretariat and the different commissions in the country are the ones that are acting directly with the teachers and the deans at the different schools throughout the different offices in the municipalities. All physicians are also called to provide first level care, and they are informed that the migration condition is not an obstacle for them to receive this medical care at all levels. And finally, I would like to tell you about the work that we are doing to promote migration governance. And we are doing this hand in hand with international bodies to strengthen the capacities of all the institutions in our country. Normally, all those prosecutors' offices that take care of boys, girls, and teenagers, that they are the ones that defend the rights of the children that are in our country. And I would also like to mention what we are talking about when we talk about boys, girls, and teenagers. We have the Register of Identification of People that is the body that has to create the information roster of the people in transit in our country. We have information that between January and July, boys and girls have been addressed to the Migration Institute. This is referring to the boys and girls that were identified by the Migration Institute. But in addition, these boys and girls, there are so many more that are not registered by the Mexican authorities, either because they are being trafficked by polleros or by they go to the shelters of the civil society. They don't come to official institutions. So this number can be higher than the one I mentioned. And I just want to highlight that out of this number, 95%, fortunately, are accompanied children. We are talking about children that are accompanied by an adult or reference or a parent. And I want to highlight that these families that we were referring to, that are the ones that we should be prioritized by to give them access to social security once that they are in the labor systems in our country. And I leave it up to here, and I hope to collaborate in the further in other
De verdad, nos gustaría tener
another
3
time.
horas para
It is great to hear you. Thank you so much for your contribution. And we could keep on discussing for such a long time. It is very important to know how we put in place all these public policies to make them a reality, to have the ownership on the roles of the institution, interesting about the conditions of migration, and maybe this. Certainly, it must exist in other countries, but all those that have any doubt of how they can really materialize, put in place this institutional scaffold, and they could take our example from CIPINA and you as a coordinator, you have put all these actions more to the local areas when you talk to the teachers, when you talk to the physicians, because these are the persons that are really handing face-to-face working with migrants because they have this right to exert. So in order for them to have access, they have to exert their right, as we were saying about women, and not only people that are the decision makers that are developing the strategies, but we really need to make the people that put it in place to be aware and to have the good understanding of what migration is from an objective point of view, and how this regularity of migration, that's a question that is on the chat, how migrants are people. At the end of the day, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or condition or rights are there regardless of our migration condition. That has nothing to do. And something that's very important is the protection of families of those migrants, to really create an integration and inclusion, social economic inclusion that will be full. It's necessary to address the families of those boys, girls, and teenagers, because it's not new for any of us that is here in this forum. Migration floods are not the ones that we had 100 years ago that we can make a systematizing. They were only men or young boys. Right now, we see their full families. We see teenagers that are not accompanied, that are traveling alone. And, that is precisely the need of trying to start to think in a broader manner how we can integrate socioeconomic programs. I think that this conversation is so interesting, but we will conclude with this question, and then we will briefly open the mic to our audience to respond to any question that you might have. How can we ensure the coordination between social actors and government in order to have the social economic inclusion of migrants? Who wants to take the floor?
Gracias.
Thank you.
Una propuesta que traemos a colación es la necesidad de
One
establecer
proposal that we bring to the table is the need to establish a legal framework that allow for a specific ecosystem for the migrants.
hablando de un marco regulatorio que permita un esquema
And we are talking about a legal
de
framework
afiliación, por ejemplo, de la seguridad
that
social,
makes
tanto del migrante en
the
tránsito
affiliation both
como
for
garantizar
people
que el
in
migrante que
transit
ya
and
salió
those
del
who
país y que pueda tener
are
beneficios. En
reaching their
Guatemala
final
hemos
destination.
tratado de
In Guatemala,
los dos
we have
conceptos
tried to apply
para
both
afiliarse
concepts.
al seguro social.
To be part of the
Hemos
Social
identificado el
Security,
tema de
we
la
have
documentación.
identified
Solo lo que se
documentation.
necesita es tener
The
un
only
patrón
thing you need is
trabajar
to have
que lo inscriba en una
a
planilla de
boss
seguridad social y
that
eso ya está
registers
hecho.
them
Porque
into a
ahora,
Social Security
por ejemplo,
list,
quisiéramos
and
estadísticas
that
este
is
año,
pretty much it.
estamos ya
In
en
terms of statistics, we reached 180
trabajadores de diferentes
workers
nacionalidades.
from
En
different
este primer semestre
nations.
pues, se han
In these
incorporado a la
first
seguridad
6
social
months, they
a
have
través del
incorporated
mecanismo de
through the
solo
mechanism
de trabajar.
of
Pero
only
también hemos
working.
abierto la posibilidad
We
de
have
acuerdo
also
con el
opened the door
1543
through the
de afiliar
1543
a los
agreement
trabajadores que
to
están en otros
make
países.
workers affiliate
¿Para
from
qué?
other
Para
countries
poder garantizar
so
la
that we
atención de su
can
familia
guarantee
acá en
the
Guatemala
attention of your
en
families
materia
here
de maternidad, en materia
in
de
terms
salud
of
para la niñez y en
maternity
materia de
and
protección de la
healthcare
juventud.
for the children and for protection to
Eso
the
nos
to
trae
the
a
elderly.
las necesidades todavía
And
pendientes.
this brings
Por
us to
ejemplo,
the pending needs.
estábamos conversando en algunos foros
For
la
instance, we were
necesidad
talking
de
in
que
some forums
existieran
this need
una
to
especie de orientadores, o le
have these
llamaríamos,
counselors,
eh, bueno, promotores o enlaces para
promoters or
los
links
migrantes, para los no
for
acompañados,
migrants for
pues a veces es
unaccompanied
algo
children's
que no se le ha
children
dado
traveling alone.
la cobertura total
I believe we
o el
haven't
análisis
had full
necesario.
coverage or the analysis that
Sí es cierto,
they
las
need.
instituciones están preparadas para
Although it is true
proveer
that we are
educativos,
prepared to
de salud,
provide them
del espacio
education and
público, sistema de
healthcare
educación público,
by the
pero los
public
migrantes no
systems,
acompañados no están a
the
este alcance
children
de
traveling
buscar.
alone do not have this
Entonces,
reach to
dentro de ese mismo
actually go
ecosistema
search. So
específico para
from
los
this
migrantes, tener
specific
una
ecosystem,
persona que se
we
encargue
need to have
de buscar a esos
people
menores no
in
acompañados
charge of
y tal
looking
vez
at them
orientar hacia cuáles son
and
las opciones que
counsel
tienen dentro
them
del país
on
cuando
which
están en
are the
tránsito.
options within the
Entonces,
country
esa
when
es
in transit.
básicamente la propuesta
So
sería
basically,
definir
our
todo el
proposal is
alcance
to
de un
define
ecosistema que
all of the
esté
scope
establecido en
of
el
an
marco del derecho
ecosystem that
nacional
is
y,
based
por
on the
supuesto, para a
legal
nivel
framework of
internacional
the
ya sabemos
country.
que cuando
And
vienen
internationally
migraciones
speaking, we know
regulares,
that when
esta es una
migrants
migración
go
comunitaria
over border, we
internacional.
need to
Y
act
ahí
as a
ya
community
tenemos
internationally.
excelentes ejemplos
And we have
cercanos
plenty of efforts on the
que han
southern hemisphere,
aparecido
on the southern
al
cone.
paraguas de las
So
Naciones
they
Unidas
have
algunos acuerdos, por ejemplo,
made some
que
agreements
hicieron
in the
en
UN
el conocimiento
framework,
está el convenio sobre
especially
residencia,
regarding residency.
que es fácil para los migrantes en tránsito,
It
para
is
los
easy
migrantes en
for
destino,
migrants in transit
adquirir una
and for migrants
residencia ahí
reaching
bajo un
their
convenio
destination. They can
suscrito por
have
los países del
a
Pacífico. Creo
household
que
through
con
an
esa
agreement
medida
by the southern
podemos
cone
también ver
countries.
cómo
So, in that
atender a
regard,
nivel de país hacia el interno
we
del
need
propio
to see
ecosistema
how
y
to
promover una
address
participación
this from the
global
country and how
internacional
to
para
participate
poder
globally
apoyarnos
in
entre
order to
países
support
con miras
each
a dar
other
beneficios
and to
al pueblo
provide
migrante.
greater benefits to the migrant
Gracias.
populations. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Edwin. Qué interesante lo que
Thank you
están
so
haciendo en
much, Dr.
Guatemala.
Edwin. It is
También
interesting what you
puede
are
dar algunas
doing in
ideas o
Guatemala,
pistas, ¿no?
and
De
it
las
probably
personas
can
participantes sobre cómo
yield
poder
ideas or
entender
clues on
este
how
tema de
to
la seguridad
extend
social,
social security
otra vez no hablando de la protección de las familias también, ¿no?
regarding
Con base también
family
a la
protection
integración
and based
laboral de
on
las
integration.
personas. Un poco pensar también en cuál sería, ¿no?
It
Eso
helps
también
us
nos queda muy
conceive
comunicada, cuál
about
sería como el rol,
which
hablando de los
could be
mecanismos
the role
transnacionales, o sea,
of
más allá de
transnational
lo que se está haciendo a
mechanisms
nivel local, cómo
beyond
poder
what we've
extender, ¿no?
done
Estas
locally
ventajas,
and
¿no?
how we can
Una vez que las
extend these
personas cruzan
advantages
fronteras a
once
través de
people
estos
cross
sistemas
borders
de
through
los
these
ministerios de relaciones
systems
internas,
of foreign relationship
internacionales, cómo también el
ministries
rol
and
de los organismos
organizations and
internacionales
the role
o
of
apoyo de
international
mediadores, ¿no?
organisms
Para poder apoyar a lo mejor
as
a generar
mediators to
estrategias, programas,
support
¿no? De manera que se
strategies
puedan
and the
extender
creation of
estos
programs
beneficios
where we can
a la
extend these
protección
benefits
y el
to
alcance de los
the
derechos
protection
de
and
las personas
the
migrantes que se están
reach of
movilizando
migrants
en esta
who
región y
are
que sería muy
moving across
interesante
the
pensar
region.
en
It would be
personas que
really
puedan
interesting
migrar,
to think
sobre
about
todo
this,
en los
how
países
we
que
can
son
broaden this,
colindantes, ¿no? Que hay
and
esta
especially
dinámica muy
neighboring
como
countries,
muy
sorry,
cotidiana, ¿no? De
which
migración
is a
más
day-to-day
allá
thing to think
de
about
una
migration as something
organización
common and
nacional.
how we
No
can
sé si
help
alguien más,
these mechanisms.
quizás
So
la doctora Luisi tienen
I don't know
alguna
if Dr.
aportación
Luisi may
adicional.
have another
Yo quería aportar algo
comment
muy
to provide.
brevemente, si
Yes,
no me
I would
importa,
like to briefly
porque estoy consciente del tiempo
give
y creo
my
que
opinion.
muchos
I
están
am
muy
aware of the time
interesados
constraints, but I
en
believe that the point
este tema que
Dr.
hemos
Edwin brings to the
establecido,
table is really
que hemos
valid. We need
verdaderamente
to
establecido un
begin
marco
working from this
regulatorio para
ecosystem
coordinar los
and the
diferentes
legal
niveles de
framework to
aplicación
coordinate the different levels of
de las
application
políticas públicas que
for
requieren
public
acceso a
policies
las personas migrantes
that
a sistemas
demand
sociales
access to
financieros.
migrants and
Empezar
to
por ahí,
social
digamos,
security
por ese
systems.
ecosistema.
We need to
Pero
begin
yo
from
quisiera
that,
añadir
from the ecosystem. I would like to also add two things. These formal
tienen que
mechanisms
incluir también procesos de
must
revisión
include revision
de la
process
aplicación de la política pública
for public policy
que permitan
application
la evolución
so that
hacia
we can
mejores
have
políticas
an
públicas y
evolution
de
towards better
estos
public
procesos también
policies.
integrar
This process
formalmente
also
también
need to formally
instancias de
integrate
reflexión
places
y de
to
comunicación
reflect and
con
to communicate
agencias y actores
with
que nos
agencies
ecosistema
and
más amplio,
actors
más allá
on
del
the
Estado
broadest
específicamente,
terms possible beyond the state, they are truly important. And that is where civil society takes part. They receive first-hand information about the needs of migrating populations, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to answer even humanitarian answer to migrating processes. So I would like to add this revision, this evolution, and the integration of the reflection and the communication with other parties that are truly important to provide information to the state regarding the access to Social Security by migrant populations. Thank you so much, Dr. Luisi. I believe that definitely this is a broader topic about mechanisms of regulation, fixed mechanisms, so to speak, and beyond that, public institutions. We talked a little bit about the role. I don't think we've talked about the private sector role, about social economic inclusion, the access to their rights. At the end of the day, they are the ones who provide this first step to entry to Social Security by guaranteeing labor rights to people, and definitely institutions from the civil society, academics. They provide other points of view that can have the generation of mechanisms to evaluate, to control, to improve probably these systems. Otherwise, you can run the risk of making them obsolete. We need to have this regulation mechanism. They also need to be neutral. They can provide from the vision. Civil society, probably, as you mentioned, they are the voice of the migrants, and they are the first-hand witnesses of the needs of the migrants and how to actually help them to actually close the gaps that migrants are facing to accessing their rights and being included in society across all their phases. I don't know if someone else wants to provide any other reflection about this topic on how to better coordinate across all levels of government and social actors prior to closing this panel participation. Sorry, me once again. My only goal here is, as you mentioned, is to probably contribute to what we are doing in Mexico so that you may implement it if you deem worthy. These migration commissions that we have are integrated by civil society organizations, by representatives of academia, by researchers, also as civil society, and also as a really important thing, we also deal with religious organization. In the case of refuge in Mexico, most of them are coordinated by religious organization. That's shelter, sorry. That's why I want to mention that this is part of the comprehensive protection system. This is part of the civil society effort. And this is regulated through an area and an instrument of the Ministry of the Interior that promotes the participation because it is part of the law, the participation of the civil society for the deliberation of the Ministry of the Interior and the states and municipal governments. We've been promoting that municipalities have these organizations, and part of this is also the civil society that address or link the civil society, migrants. And last but not least, as an example of the importance of the role of civil society that I know you all are well aware of, one phenomenon that we've seen importantly here is that many of the migrating women that come with their children or teenagers and get a job in our country face the lack of social security because most of these job posts do not provide for that. And when they don't have social security, they struggle with children nurseries and children care. And we have organizations that deal with this so that the parents can actually go to work. So I believe this is something that we need to promote, that all employees can access social security, that can fully incorporate, because shamefully, in most cases, this is a barrier to access if you have a family that has nowhere to have childcare. So that's the end of my intervention. Thank you very much for your contribution, evidently, and thank you for your clarification of those who take part of the committees. And once again, we need to think about the integration and the inclusion of migrants beyond the individual and looking at them as family nuclei and everything that constitutes this integration. I believe that with no further ado, if you have no other comments, I would like to thank you, every one of you as members of the panels, for your great contributions. We've talked about important and interesting topics about identification and the characteristics of people. We have talked about people from different nationalities and job backgrounds and origins. Also, we have talked about particular groups of migrant populations that you address and that they need to be seen or conceived on a differentiated way in order to make them part of the social security with success, like women, children, and teenagers. Also, the understanding of the importance of the conditions, not only about people themselves and their characteristics and what they experience in their countries of origin, but also understanding the structures of the destination countries. We've talked about the understanding from the national frameworks, and we have also seen the appropriation itself and the understanding of international agreements and make them come to practice, not only about this, but also with good practices, as we've talked by Cipina in Mexico's case, and also other practices from the organized civil society, as we've talked about gender issues. From Costa Rica, some examples can be certainly reproduced across the region. We have had alliances from civil society to guarantee rights, and this is still a work in progress that is insufficient, because if they are not connected to comprehensive strategies where we have the full participation of the public sector and the private sector, these organisms that can act as mediators, as moderators, that provide us with a practical provision of, in real time, facing the challenges of migrants to achieve this social and economic inclusion and the protection of their families in their countries of origin. We have this need to see the people who stay home and that they probably won't be part of the formal job market, but they are part of their support network of the migrants. We have also talked about the importance of talking about strategies that are more complex, the better use of the remittances and the abilities of those who arrive especially women, regarding the potential job market, how to improve these mechanisms, this legislation, and public strategies and public policies so that women in this particular case can see their guarantee of rights and they may have this integration to the job market in a dignified way. So in the case of housework, we can integrate also the children and teenagers to healthcare and education, just as any other children. And then going back to the topic about coordination and how the mechanisms are important, especially to be perceived from the legal framework and from the ecosystem point of view, without disregard of the public initiative and the legislation and the jurisdiction. This can be materialized from different sectors through integration and dialogue, but mostly the strategies in which they are part of, also external factors and employers themselves, as well as international agencies, researchers, NGOs, to have a full picture of what it takes to actually provide the access to the rights and to security, social security in their destination countries. With no further ado, I have nothing to say but thank you for waiting to this moment. Thank you for being with us and bearing with the extension in time. This has been a truly interesting conversation. It has been for me a pleasure to mediate and to know everyone's perspectives. And with no further ado, I will give back the floor to the director, Brandon Perez, and thank you very much for being with us so far. Thank you, Merari, and thank you for being such an excellent moderator through over 2 hours that we've been talking about. Time is sometimes our worst enemy, but on behalf of Alvaro Belarca and of all the CISS team, I would like to thank our members of the panels and our audience who's been here in Zoom and in our social media during this time. And remember that during this week, we will be talking about different social security topics. All of the 5 subregions that are part of this conference has labeled or scheduled a program. We invite you, same time, same place. We will talk about the financing mechanisms for Social Security. Also, thank you to Chaira Salomo, who's the link of South America, who's been the person that's been contacting you during this time, and for the team. Thank you to the counselors and to Oscar Guzman, who's here with us. And prior to saying goodbye, I would like to invite you to this invitation that the subregional coordination has talked about migration from South America. You can scan this QR code and you will have this article. And with no further ado, I would like to thank you for being here and we'll see you here at the same time. Thank you very much.
Gracias.